2023. Thank you so much to Erez and everybody else who put this on for having me. I feel very honored to be one of the speakers tonight, and I hope I'm going to share a compelling story with you. It's a story that's very dear to my heart. It's a story of my personal transformation. So thank you, Erez and Light of Infinite Festival, for having me here tonight. The title of my talk is a striking one. The title of my talk is, I Almost Commit Suicide and Then God Stepped In. Tonight I want to tell you the story of my personal transformation from somebody who was an atheist to somebody who became a person of faith, a man of God. And I want to tell you the story of what happened that night on the darkest, worst night of my life, and how I was literally saved at the last minute. In the winter of 2011, I almost took my own life. I was a freshman at USC. It was my first semester, freshman year of college. And a few months before that, I had started in the fall, August or September. And the first couple of weeks of college were going okay. I was sort of trying to find my footing. And in October of 2011, I was suddenly diagnosed with an incurable and excruciating disease of the stomach called Crohn's disease. And I started going to doctors. I started, going to the emergency room. I started trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And nobody could figure it out. Some doctors thought that maybe I had colon cancer. Some doctors thought that maybe I had Crohn's disease. Some doctors said it was ulcerative colitis. And I was basically suffering daily in and out of hospital beds, in and out of the ER, trying to figure out what was wrong. I took every medication under the sun that was available on the market at the time, and nothing was working. Fast forward 1 year later, I had been living in and out of the hospital for 11 months. I had 13 surgeries. I had parts of my colon and small bowel removed, and still nothing was working, even though I had literally tried everything under the sun. Now, as you can imagine, this was an incredibly painful and traumatic time in my life. I was just trying to be a freshman in college like everybody else. And instead of just having the normal college experience, this is what I was suffering through. I couldn't eat anything, so I started losing weight like that. By the end of my freshman year of college, I weighed 112 pounds. I was literally skin and bone because I just could not keep anything down. And as a result of all of this, I started having major panic attacks, and I fell into a very deep, very dark depression. I fell into such a depression that I finally resolved to take my own life. And this was a very stark contrast to the person that I used to be. When I was in high school, I was cool. I had a lot of friends. I was popular. I peaked in high school. I'm not cool anymore. But I really enjoyed my life. I had a good life. I played sports. I was well liked. And when I was in elementary school, I had a lot of emotional issues that I ended up sort of suppressing, which I'll talk to you about later. But my high school experience right before college was going pretty well. So the fact that all of this had just hit me like a bus out of nowhere was incredibly difficult for me to digest. And as I said, it was so difficult that I decided I had reached the end of my road, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take the excruciating pain. I couldn't take seeing all of my friends and classmates go to class and meet girls and choose their majors and do all of this amazing stuff while I was in the hospital. So tonight I want to tell you the story of what happened on the night that I almost lost my life and how God stepped in. Now, if you take issue with my use of the word God, please bear with me. because I used to as well. As I mentioned, I was a person who had absolutely no connection to Judaism other than having a bar mitzvah. I didn't believe in God. I was actually an atheist. And I thought that people who believed in God were fairly, for lack of a better word, ignorant. Now I realize, of course, that I was the ignorant one. But this is really a story of transformation. And it's such a story of transformation that when I look back on the person that I used to be, I truly feel like I am speaking about someone else. And what I tell my clients now is that real growth is such that if you can look back on your life, if you can put so much distance between who you are now and who you used to be, that you don't even recognize that person, that's how you know you've really grown and you've really evolved. Sorry, let me turn on my do not disturb. So, winter of 2011, I've made my decision. I've come up with a method. I've come up with a plan. And I actually went so far as to write a note to my family. I was going to leave a suicide note, and I wrote it all out, and it explained all of my reasons. And I left it on the desk of my dormitory, New North at USC, where I was planning to eventually be found. Now, there was a pharmacy on campus, and it was a Saturday night. It was after everybody had finished their final exams in late December, maybe mid-December. And I walked to the pharmacy. I got a concoction of pills that I had learned in weird forums online in a certain combination and a certain amount would be deathly. I knew that it was going to be a painful and unpleasant death. And pardon me if this is triggering for anybody. But I was walking back to my dorm, and I had the plan and I had the method. And I got to my dorm and I was about to execute. Now, what I haven't told you so far is that at this time in my life, I had a younger cousin named Sydney, who I was very close to. Sydney had had a very difficult life. Her parents split up when she was young. Her sister and brother had a lot of mental and emotional issues. She had been abused by boyfriends who she had over the years. And I was sort of a mentor or an older brother to Sydney. She and I had a very close bond. And I loved her so much, and I cared so much about her. And I often thought of Sydney. But on this one night, I wasn't thinking of Sydney. I wasn't thinking of anybody other than myself. Even when I wrote the suicide note, I was only thinking about myself. And I went to my dormitory, and I unpacked all of the stuff, and I was about to do the deed. And all of a sudden, at the very last second, right before the first pill went into my mouth, I thought of Sydney. And I remember this as clearly as I am sitting in front of you today. And what I thought to myself was, if I am not here tomorrow, what will happen to Sydney? Who will look after her? Because her parents were deeply entrenched in their divorce. Her siblings weren't going to be of any use to her. Certainly couldn't rely on the guys that she was dating. I didn't know anything about her friends. All I knew is that I had been helpful to Sydney throughout different points of her life. And if I took my life, what was going to happen to her? And I'm standing there in my dorm, pill bottle in hand, suicide note on the table, ready to go, having made my decision. And right before I start, I think to myself, what will happen to Sydney? And that was the first time I ever experienced what I call a God moment. Now, I'm sure that there have been many God moments throughout my life, but that's the first one that I can remember, that I can point to and say that that was God's doing, that God dropped Sydney into my mind right at that exact moment when I needed it most. And I am beyond pleased and proud and grateful and humbled to say that tonight, Sydney is here in this virtual audience supporting me in my work, as if she hasn't done for me, as if she hasn't done enough for me in my life already. I often tell her that I owe my life to her. My story is not only about that God moment and what I've learned from it and how I've unpacked it over the course of the last 10 years, but my story is also one about the importance of connecting your life to something that is larger and greater than yourself. Because the truth is that when we are thinking about ourselves, when we are thinking about our own problems and our own fears and our own worries day in and day out, it is a recipe for depression and disaster. I had been thinking about myself day in, day out for years, and especially for that full year when I was so sick and so depressed. And it brought me to the brink of suicide. But when I thought of someone else for just a split second, it saved my life. Thinking of yourself all the time, putting yourself at the center of your universe all the time, is, as I said, a recipe for disaster. Now, as a therapist and as a coach, I'm constantly teaching and preaching the importance of working on yourselves. And in fact, my business, my livelihood depends on people working on themselves and thinking about their issues. But there's a difference between paying attention to your issues and fixating and ruminating on your issues, right? There's a difference between looking at your issues and being consumed by your issues. There's a very fine line between self-awareness and self-deprecation. And we need to tread lightly. We need to toe that line carefully. I obviously fell onto the wrong side of it. My story is also one about the importance of having God in your life, or at the very least, having some sort of spiritual connection, believing that there is some order to this universe and to the things that happen to us in our lives, and believing that there is some purpose to our pain. I believe that having a spiritual connection is so incredibly important because even if you don't believe in God, God will always believe in you. For years, even after I was given another chance at life, I still completely rejected God's kindness and belief in me. I rejected God's omnipotence. I rejected God's omnipresence. And I started to see little glimpses of God's incredible work in my life. But, I always had this narrative that I was an atheist. And I always had this idea of myself as somebody who was not traditional, somebody who was very progressive. And frankly, I completely rejected the idea of faith. I thought the idea that you would believe in something without any concrete evidence, without any proof, was ludicrous. As I said earlier, I thought that people of faith were ignorant and that they were just choosing to believe something to make themselves feel better. But that's just it. That's what we're doing. We are choosing to believe something to make ourselves feel better. And what I understand now is that the people who don't do that are the ones who are leaving money on the table. And I used to be one of them, I'm embarrassed to say. The other thing that was ridiculous is that I was already believing in things in the absence of any concrete evidence. It's called fear. And this is how I learned that faith and fear are two sides of the exact same coin. Faith is the belief in the absence of any concrete evidence that we can prove, in the absence of anything tangible, that good things will happen in our lives and that we will be taken care of and protected. And fear is the belief in the absence of any concrete evidence, in the absence of anything that we can point to that's tangible, that bad things will happen in our lives. So you can say, as I used to, that people who have faith are crazy, but people who have fear are just as crazy. If our faith is blind, our fear is equally blind. And once I recognized that, it was a matter of what am I choosing to believe? Having faith is not about denying that bad things happen to good people. It's not about deluding yourself into believing that the world is all rainbows and butterflies. Having faith is making a choice of what you choose to put in your personal foreground, right? We all have a personal foreground and a personal background, and everything exists. The good exists, the bad exists. Our faith exists, our fears exist. Sometimes we feel happy and healthy and strong and we feel motivated. Other times we feel terrible. And you know what? We have good reasons for all of it. If you turn on CNN right now, you'll see what a horrible world we live in. But if you go on nice, motivational websites like Upworthy, you'll see what an amazing world that we live in. So we have reasons for whatever we choose to believe. But the question is, are you thinking about something that is moving you closer to the person you want to be? Are you thinking about things that are helping you get to where you would like to go? Are you thinking about things that empower you and make you stronger? Or are you thinking about things that make you weaker, that make you sadder? What are you choosing to focus on? Because our attention is like water for a plant. Whatever we focus our attention on is what grows, just like when we're watering a plant. However, there's a tricky side to this, which is that if we focus too much of our attention on ourselves, we die. Just as if you pour too much water on the plant, if you try too hard to make it grow, it's also going to die because you're going to drown the plant in water, right? So we need to choose things to put in our personal foreground that help us grow without making ourselves the center of our universe. In other words, we need to grow as a byproduct of what we focus on, not by focusing so much on ourselves. As I said, when all you do is think about your own problems and think about your issues, you're bound to be consumed by fear. And it is going to take you away from the ability to have faith. Now, I want to be totally honest. I just like any person, get worried and I get afraid. I have my good days, I have my bad days. But the difference is that now I have tools that allow me to deal with those fears. I used to be the most anxious person you've ever met. Especially after what happened to me my freshman year. And, it's not as if after you have a suicide attempt, you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm so happy I have this amazing life and I'm so grateful. Really, you just feel even more defeated and you feel depressed and you feel like, wow, I couldn't even do that successfully. And my anxiety went through the roof because I was reading my suicide note and thinking about all sorts of terrible things. And today, thank God, I have very little anxiety, and it's because I have the tools to deal with it when it pops up. And the main tools that I use are my connection to God and my faith that everything is going to work out, and my connection to other people and making other people the center of my universe, helping them, taking myself out of the middle of my world. Just one second. As I said earlier, one thing I've learned throughout this entire process is that there is always a purpose to our pain. Although bad things happen to good people, and although we may never know the reason why something is happening, there is always a purpose to our pain. You may be wondering, why is it that at the age of 19, my first month in college, I was diagnosed with this excruciating, incurable disease that I now have to live with and manage for the rest of my life? You may be wondering, was this hereditary? Why me? Why didn't this happen to someone else? Did I do something to bring this on? What was the purpose of all of this? Did this need to happen? Was this just a random fluke? And why did I fall into such a terrible depression after that? Why, as a 19, 20, 21-year-old kid, did I need to be isolating myself in my room, away from everybody, experiencing organ failure, weighing 112, 115 pounds, throwing up everything that I tried to eat? Did I deserve that? Did I cause it? Was it my fault? These are questions that I struggled with for years. And ultimately, the real question I was trying to answer is, what was the purpose of this pain? Was there a purpose? And that is, when you zoom out from all the minutia, that is the purpose that we are all trying to answer when life does not go our way. The question that we are all trying to answer is, what is the purpose of this pain? Is this here for a reason? And the answer is yes. The answer is that there's always a purpose to the pain. The answer is also that the bad things that happen to us in our lives may not be our fault, but they are our responsibility. And that is a crucial distinction. If I own a grocery store, I own all the merchandise in there, I have to pay the rent, and Hurricane Katrina comes in, sweeps through the town, bulldozes my house, bulldozes my grocery store, and I lose all of my merchandise and I lose all of my livelihood, God forbid. Is it my fault? Of course not. Did I ask for it to happen? Of course not. But is it my responsibility to clean up the wreckage? Absolutely. Why? Because no one else is going to come in and do it for me. So my disease, first of all, was there a purpose to it? Yes. Secondly, did I cause it? No. But is it my responsibility? Yes. Because even if I had the best doctor in the world, even if I had the perfect protocol for getting rid of this disorder, even if I could take a magic pill that was going to cure my depression, no matter how you slice it, it was up to me. I could rely on doctors, I could rely on friends and family, and thank God I had many people who wanted to support me. But the thing to understand about your pain is, first of all, the lesson that's there, why it has appeared in your life. And secondly, the responsibility that you have to take now that it has appeared. So what I learned in my case, which is going to be different from your case, it's going to be different from everybody's case. But in my particular scenario, what I learned after years and years of research and talking to the world's best experts and reading everything I could find and doing a lot of meditation and introspection and all of this stuff, is that autoimmune disorders, which I have, are mostly the result of emotional injury that has been suppressed and pushed down. When we have psychological issues, whether it's anxiety, whether it's fear, whether it's trauma, whether it's abandonment, attachment issues that we haven't addressed and we haven't brought out into the light of day. We stuff them down, which was my experience in elementary school and middle school that I referred to earlier. And we repress them and we push them down into the dark. And then one day we start to break out. We have acne. One day we wake up and we're throwing up. One day we wake up and we go to the doctor and they diagnose us with some disorder. And they say that you have a hereditary disposition. One day a young person has a stroke. Who knows, right? But we now know in the field of psychology, there's something called somatization disorder. And basically what we know is that when psychological issues have been suppressed and haven't been given the light of day, they manifest themselves in physiological disorders. Now, what is the purpose of this? In my particular case, this was God's way of waking me up to the fact that I had a lot of mental and emotional and psychological issues that I had not addressed. And if I wasn't going to read the signs, if I wasn't going to read the writing on the wall, then it was going to take something extreme to wake me up to this. And unfortunately, I didn't get the message the first time. I didn't have doctors who asked me about my mental and emotional state. It took me a very long time to recognize and understand that nothing was going to get better in my life physically unless I was also addressing the emotional aspect. Because as we all know, the mental, the physical, and the spiritual cannot be, they are indiscernible. The emotional and the physiological and the spiritual and the mental, they're all connected in this one web. It took me a very long time to figure that out, unfortunately. But until we figure it out, God is going to put us through the same pain over and over and over again until we get the message. And you may have experienced this in your dating life. You keep dating the same type of person over and over again. They're just wearing different clothing. You may experience this in your career. You keep getting fired or you keep jumping around from job to job. There is always a message in the bad things that happen in our lives, particularly the bad events that repeat, right? Now, the ancient Kabbalists, we know from Kabbalah that there is such a thing called tikkun. Our tikkun is our soul's correction in this world. Our tikkun is the things within ourselves that we need to correct in order to evolve and grow and shine our light in this world and uplift other people and really fulfill our life's purpose. So it all tracks. We now know scientifically that unless we heal ourselves emotionally, it's going to manifest in physiological disorders. And the ancient Kabbalists from thousands and thousands of years ago were telling us the same thing, which is that every one of us comes into this world with parts of our soul that we need to correct. And if we don't correct those things, we're going to be put through pain over and over again. And that is the purpose of our pain. The purpose of our pain is to recognize what is it within myself that I need to correct. Now, of course, understanding the purpose of your pain necessitates taking responsibility, because it is impossible to realize why your pain is here unless you're willing to take responsibility for it. It's also impossible to take responsibility for your pain unless you recognize why it's here. Because why should I take responsibility for something that's completely random? Why should I take responsibility for something that is out of my control? It's caused by my genetics, or it's caused by God, or it's caused by the government, or it's caused by the economy. Those are people who live their lives believing that they are victims because they think that their pain is random. And as a result, they don't take any responsibility for it. Because they don't take any responsibility for it, they never understand why their pain is there. And therefore, they live their entire lives feeling like a victim. I'm very blessed that I had that mentality only for a short time, because that is the number one thing that stops people from succeeding in their lives, is lack of responsibility, lack of compassion for themselves, of course, but lack of personal accountability and believing that the reason bad things happen to them in their lives is due to external factors that they have zero control over and that they can't make better. They can't do anything about them, right? That's no way to live. And I know because I've experienced it. So, as I said, I used to ignore God's kindness in my life. I used to ignore the amazing miracles performed in my life all the time. And I had no concept of my tikkun. But now that I have God in my life and that I have connected to my Jewish identity, I am not only happy and healthy and calm, and I have these incredible tools to deal with my anxiety and my fears whenever they come up. I also have, thank God, an illustrious career. If I had not taken responsibility, if I had not understood my tikkun, if I had believed that all of this was random, and if I had continued to reject God's presence in my life, there's no telling how long it would take me to recognize my purpose in this world, which is to use my gift of connection and communication to help other people with their challenges. It took me about 4 or 5 years after everything that I went through to feel like I was truly happy, healthy, strong, spiritually connected, and to feel like I could actually make a difference in someone else's life. But at the beginning of my sort of self-healing or self-improvement journey, I made 2 commitments to myself. I made 2 promises. And I made these promises with so much conviction that I told myself I was going to go to my grave having fulfilled these promises one way or another. The first promise is that I was going to make my life better. I was not going to live like a victim. I was going to overcome this disease. I was going to remove it somehow from my body, or at the very least remove the symptoms to make it dormant so that I can live a normal life. I was going to rid myself of anxiety as much as possible. I was going to learn how to have happy and healthy relationships with other people. I was going to learn what it actually means to love myself and how to do that. And my second commitment to myself was, if I can do all of those things, then I swore to myself that I was going to teach other people how I did them. Not why they should do them, not what they need to do, but how to do it. Because the issue that I kept running into when I was trying to rebuild my life was that I developed a tremendous amount of self-awareness. I started to really understand what my issues were and where they came from and how I got them. But when I would ask other people, okay, what do I do about these issues? How do I get rid of my depression? How do I get rid of my crippling anxiety? Can you teach me how to meditate? Can you teach me how to love myself? Can you teach me how to have healthy, happy relationships? It was crickets. The answers that I always got was like, well, that's kind of a personal journey that you have to figure out on your own. And, all of this stuff that now I totally reject. I totally reject the notion that life is a journey that we all have to navigate our way through, and we have to learn everything by ourselves. They say that a smart person is one who learns from their own mistakes, but a wise person is one who learns from the mistakes of others. And ultimately, the way that I became successful was learning from people who are way smarter than me, people who had been through what I had been through and told me what they did and how they did it to get out of their slump. So what I believe now is that life is a process. It's not a journey, it's a process. If we put in certain inputs, we're going to get out certain outputs. There are certain things, there are certain indisputable truths about the ways to live a good, healthy, happy life that work every time. People call them traditional, but the reason they are traditional is that they are of tradition. And the reason that they have made their way into history as a tradition is that they actually work. So this is what I teach people now in my coaching and my therapy practice. Thank God, by the grace of God, Baruch Hashem, I feel that I have met my two promises. One was to turn my life around, and the other is to teach other people how they can turn their lives around. And as I said earlier, all of this came from a few things. One is the undeniable God moment of God stepping into my life and stopping me from taking my own life right at the last millisecond and reminding me that my life is not actually about me. God knew that I didn't believe in him, but he knew that I believed in Sydney. So he rerouted me to Sydney in that moment so that I wouldn't do a terrible thing. 2, taking responsibility for what had happened to me. Not thinking of myself as a victim, thinking of myself as an agent of change, and understanding that even though this wasn't my fault, it was my responsibility, and now I had to be accountable for it because there was a purpose to it. It wasn't random. And 3, the importance of connecting myself to something larger and greater than myself. Connecting myself to other people, connecting myself to God, cultivating my faith so that I actually have a backbone that is stronger than the whims of this world, giving myself a way to create chaos out of order. And the way that I do that every day is I get up and I devote to myself that I am going to serve God and I'm going to serve other people to the best of my ability. And I have faith that if I do that, if I serve God, if I help other people, if I fulfill my small obligations every day, I do not have to worry about my future, and I do not have to feel ashamed of my past. It took me a very, very long time to be able to come tell this story because I felt so much shame. I felt embarrassed. I felt like girls aren't going to want to date me. I felt like I had failed in life. I felt like I have this scarlet letter of somebody who went through something horrible and wanted to take their own lives, and I had to hide that part of myself. And I was also beyond freaked out about what I was going to do in my future. Who's going to want to hire me? How do I deal with this anxiety? What am I going to do? How do I make money? Where do I go in this world? I had no hope and I had no direction. And what I know now is that as long as I emulate God, as long as I do my best to serve other people, and as long as I fulfill the tiny obligations that I set for myself every single day, I do not have to worry about my future, and I do not have to feel ashamed of my past. I hope that this was uplifting and inspiring and helpful. If anybody is watching, I would be more than happy to connect with you. If there's anything you need help with in your life, whether it's your faith, your spirituality, your dating life, your relationships, your self-confidence, if there's anything in this talk that resonated with you, please reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook. It's just my name, Kevin Nahai. My website is kevinnahai.com. Thank you once again to Erez for having me tonight and putting on this incredible Light of the Infinite Festival. God bless you all.